of Black art. But today, like I said, it's a very special edition. We were actually supposed to do a special 2-day event of Afrofuture Friday and Afrofuturism 2.0, but COVID-19 had some other plans. But we still wanted to give you at least a taste of some of the conversations that we're going to have during that time. And so what I like to do, gathered here today, are some of the preeminent voices in Afrofuturism. And I figured just start by, well, actually the conversation we're going to have, while we have Sheree Renee Thomas, Reynaldo Anderson, Andrew Rollins, and we'll be allow them to introduce themselves here in a moment. But the question on deck for today is, we have Reynaldo to thank for this title, Afrofuturism BC and AC. So that's before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. So from 1619 to COVID-19, we're going to be discussing the role of Afrofuturism in navigating our current situation and moving forward. And for the format for today, I figured we'll just go for 45 minutes or so hearing from our panelists before we open it up to general questions. And so let's just go ahead and start with introductions. And I'll just go, how about we'll go Reynaldo, then Sheree, and then Andrew for introductions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation from the Kepler Institute and the Indiana Humanities Council and the other community partners that you have there in Indianapolis to share with you these ideas. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about when I gave you that title, and now I've been able to really narrow it into focus. Before COVID-19, you could say that a lot of people, I think, that were attracted to Afrofuturism, but I think they were, what's the term they like using? They kind of sometimes engage in magical thinking, but it is not necessarily rooted. Some of what they were trying to do was maybe rooted in a particular desire with no kind of practical means or even a start of how to get to what they desired. I mean, it might have been, and that was the more difficult part. I think that's kind of what people have been really kind of mapping the last 15 years or so, to a certain extent with the advent of social media. But I think COVID-19 has ushered in a paradigm shift. And what I mean is, by paradigm shift, there was a way things were done before this pandemic exposed all these flaws. And then there are some things that are magnified that were always there, that are now magnified. I've shared this with my friend Andrew, that I think in the last several weeks, we've moved into what I would call, and with another author whose name I can't pronounce, necro-capitalism at the moment. What I mean by necro-capitalism, that means where they have the right to work you to death, making our people go back to these meat plants and go to these jobs the same way they worked our ancestors to death during slavery. And I think that, and going back to the title, Curating the End of the World, that's a project that myself, Stacey Robinson, and Tiffany Barber decided to co-curate with our partners like the Octavia Butlers Network and other people that are interested in the topic, saying, okay, what can we do to intellectually, artistically, and creatively capture this moment, okay, and in this certain moment of history in terms of archiving it, to borrow a term from what we used in a previous exhibition, like metadata thieves, taking the data through all these things that we create and ideas we create and archiving it for somebody to look at to capture this moment. And a lot of times Afrofuturists, and I think properly we kind of do a kind of Sankofa move in terms of look to the past, get to the future. And one of the people that I've really going back and it's made me rethink about his work was W.B. Du Bois' work when he published Dark Water back in 1920. And I commented to friends, I said, this guy was writing this book at the end of World War I, during the Spanish flu pandemic, and in the wake of Red Summer. So we kind of already had a historical template for what white supremacy looks like. You got a war, a pandemic, and white people are experiencing anxiety about their jobs. We know they do violence. We know that that Black and brown people are going to suffer the most because of lack of access to health care. And we know that we're not going to be prioritized. So the other thing with that paradigm shift, I think those voices who people used to put on media to so-called speak for us now have basically been disqualified. We don't really care to hear from Don Lemons anymore, Van Jones, and all these other grown Black folk getting on TV crying about what's happening to us. I mean, Black people, we are still in 400 years of dystopia, you know, so it's like welcome to the Terror Dome, to borrow from Public Enemy. And now they're experiencing all this economic terror and all this. And the three things that are going to come in the wake of this paradigm, I think we got to look at serious Afrofuturists, because now if we are who we say we are, that means we should be able to translate ideas and concepts into what a program would look like. Now, the three things that are going to come out of this thing, you're going to have to look at psychology, institutions, and systems. Like, for example, in the wake of the great pandemic over 100 years ago, that's when they started the hygiene program, social hygiene stuff, because they realized Americans didn't know how to keep themselves clean to keep diseases and stuff from spreading. Now, and after this pandemic, you have to deal with post-traumatic stress syndrome, all this social distancing. They're bringing up like young people 25 on down are probably going into depression because we're a communal people, human beings. And all this social distancing, there's going to be some type of post-traumatic stress and all these other behaviors emerging because of all this social isolation. Now, I know some of my good house Negroes miss being around white folks every day, so I'm sure they're experiencing some type of feelings about that while they fighting to try and get back with them, you know, and at the same time while they trying to shoot some of us down like dogs in the street for just jogging or even sleeping in the damn bed, minding our business. But some of the things that we're gonna have to do are gonna be around, as I said, the psychological aspect, and then the second thing, institution.
Well, hang on for a second, Reynaldo. Let me have everybody else introduce themselves real quick before we dive,
Okay.
because you're already rolling. So
I
want to have my other panelists introduce themselves real quick. So Sheree.
Hi, my name is Sheree Renee Thomas. I'm a writer, poet, and editor based in Memphis. I have a new book coming out. Well, it's out now. 9-Bar Blues, Stories from an Ancient Future. It's my first all-fiction collection from Third Man Books. And I have 2 other hybrid collections, which means they're multi-genre, poetry and fiction. And those are Shotgun Lullabies and Thinking Under the Tree of Life. And I edited 2 volumes of Dark Matter. The first was A Century of Speculative Fiction from the African Diaspora. And the second was Reading the Bones. They both won the World Fantasy Award. Happy to be here. Thank you all for sharing part of your Saturday with us.
And Brother Andrew.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, it's so good to be here with you, Maurice, and be part of this presentation. And let me just give you a few ideas that I want to share right off the cuff, because you was talking about before the coronavirus and after the coronavirus. I think the coronavirus has been an accelerant. I was talking to a friend of mine in Los Angeles about 2 weeks ago. Called me Saturday night, a preacher. It's when we really are polishing up our sermons. And he was telling me, our church, before this happened, that our church had about 5 years to change, or else we would go out of business because we become obsolete. He said, Rollins, I believe 5 years now has become 5 months. That time that was accelerated has been even accelerated now, and the pace of change has increased. And one of the things we're really fighting for is survival right now. Will we survive as a people, or will we go suffer the fate of genocide? I know that when we found out that Blacks were dying at a higher rate than white folks from the coronavirus, my mind flipped into an old saying in the Black community: when white folks get a cold, we get pneumonia. And so how are we going to survive this? And I was talking to Reynaldo here a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about post-capitalism. And I said, well, I want to know, what is post-capitalism when you have it compounded by a pandemic? Oh my God, he called me a couple of days later. He said, I got it, Rev. It's called necro-capitalism. Capitalism that will determine that in order for it to function, some people must die so that other folks can live. I said, well, that sounds like the fate we had on the slave ships, that some folk had to die so that other folks could live. So what we got is an accelerated version of the old time slavery, which we call natural capitalism. And then and finally, I wrote a piece called Apocalypse Now. And that's going to be part of this presentation, this art exhibition dealing with the end of the world. But I said that when Black people, when we get through with this, when we come out of this crucible, and we're going to be going through this for a while. This is we'll go through this at least another 18 months to 2 years. This is going to go on for a while. It's not going to be a fast thing. And when we get through with this, we're going to be a different people. We're going to be stronger. We're going to be wiser. We're going to be pure. And we're going to be more sharply focused when we get through with this.
All right, Reynaldo. Oh, actually, Rasul, are you there still?
Yes, I'm still there.
Yeah, could you introduce yourself and introduce and tell us a little bit about the Kepler Institute while we're here?
Yeah, sure. Hello, my name is Russell Palmer. I am your co-host here today, and I'm also an Afrofuturist along with Maurice Broadus. I'm also a member of the Kepler Institute. In summary, the Kepler Institute is a over 16-year-old non-profit organization whose mantra is community power through self-mastery, which we try to promote empowering the community through myriads of programs that help people improve their skills, self-confidence, and expertise. And this Afrofuturism Fridays, which you participate in today, is one of those set of programs where we can come together and discuss matters of import, such as the coronavirus, through an Afrofuturistic lens, so we can always be looking forward.
All right, thanks. Well, let's go ahead and pick it up. I feel like I interrupted Reynaldo midstream there. So you were saying psychology and institutions and systems as we're
going to deal with a lot of post-traumatic stress. Look, J.C. Penney just declared bankruptcy yesterday. Been around for 118 years. A lot of institutions that we grew up with are going to go away over the next 18 months. And some of them are going to survive, or some of them will have to be reformed. Others are going to go away. And then we're going to have to look at systems. For example, macro take on this, big picture take on this. Globalization, the key thing that drove globalization was the supply chain way of economics, the way that worked. Well, and this is what I'm thinking, and my diversity people. But no, there's one thing where I agree with some of the conservatives. Some of this is China's fault. Now, you can't tell me you got the ability to put rockets up into space and satellites, and you can't keep a damn pandemic coming out of those little dirty, filthy markets in Wuhan, China. I was in Wuhan 10 years ago. The place stinks. The pollution was so bad 10 years ago. Every time at the end of the day, when I came out the conference, when I cleaned the mucus out of my nose, it was black. So it was dirty back then. And so my thing is, yeah, they are responsible for the global spread of this to a certain extent. Now it's just compounded by the ignorance of the leadership that we have in a lot of these countries now, from Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump, Boris Johnson in England. I've never seen such a concentrated assemblage of stupidity that poses as leaders in the history books in my life. Or we could just historicize it. I think you got a bunch of ultra nationalists leading a lot of these powerful countries, and they were not prepared to deal with the pandemic. Hence this entrance of what we would call necro-capitalism at the moment, where some people are going to work and die so that others that are better off can live, to keep the system going on a little bit longer. Now, I think a lot of our people, and I was telling Andrew some time ago, our people still ain't ready to cut the umbilical cord with a lot of this stuff yet. They're like, they try to hold on until Biden gets elected. And I think at best, that's nothing more than a defensive tactic, because he's not going to be, people going to still die. The economy is going to still be bad, even if he does win. And so we got to really start thinking about some alternatives. And then I guess part of the message has to be, for this dystopia, Afrofuturists are going to have to come up with an anti-dystopian type of program that gives people hope about the future. Now, if we Sankoferize that, the seeds for the Harlem Renaissance were sown during the last great pandemic. And that's why Alain Locke came out and talked about the new Negro. And as he was like the dean or the philosopher for the Harlem Renaissance just within a few years after that. And you see the impact of Garveyism and all these other national liberation movements that really begin to take off in the 20s, okay? And so this is where I think, referencing what Andrew said earlier, I think, we're gonna be real focused on whatever we're coming out of this, because we know that there are a section of people in this country that really don't give a damn about us. And we need to start doing some things that appear logical and intelligent and practical, rather than relying on praying for the moral change of people who are basically our political enemies. And they are enemies. You know, we share this country with them, but the conservative movement in America is the enemy of Black people. And we need to quit saying that now the country is not going to be united. This pandemic, there's a blue response and a red response. Okay. And even the best social scientists out there now say that America is right now in the preconditions for a civil war. Now we can go on and act like it's not there, but it is there. Here in my part of the country, before the shutdown happened, they were not even, I had to go through a friend and a personal contact to go get my weapons and ammunition to prepare to defend my household, because they closed all the gun shops here, and Black people couldn't buy any weapons here leading up to the shut-in here in the Midwest, because so many white people that come over from Illinois, whatever, buying up all weapons and munitions, that the Black people couldn't get stuff to defend and take care of themselves. Now, I think some of them have found other ways, but a lot of them brothers and sisters were strapped already. So, and you got two different kinds of thought here. It's kind of like you got the middle-class Black bourgeoisie on this kind of E. Franklin Frazier fantasy, thinking that, okay, we gonna be able to vote ourselves up out of this. And then you got the brothers and sisters from the hood that's being real practical. They were the ones going to get the ammunition and supplies, because they know that they hanging on by a thread, and they know how violent the society is and can get. And so it's like a tinderbox here in the Midwest, and it's regional. On the West Coast, my friends that are into Afrofuturism are complaining about the dominance of what they're calling it the nanny state, because the West has formed a regional bloc of kind of a strong liberal approach, and maybe the Northeast is kind of following that. And then you got other parts, the old Confederacy is going into that necro-capitalism real hard, whatever. I mean, like I've been in touch with Sheree and some other people all around the country. They're having different responses to this. And you had, and I mean, it's simple to find it. You got white people out here now that's going on spitting on food and walking amongst us with no mask on, trying to breathe us to make us sick. And that's not a conspiracy theory anymore. We know it's happening.
Right.
You know, so hey, I mean, so it's kind of like this dystopian thing is no longer science fiction anymore. It's the daily news, or what William Gibson said: the future is already here. Okay, it's not even. I don't think it's about to be evenly distributed instead of unevenly distributed now. But the future is here. So now the people that when Sheree was doing her great research 20 years ago, now that stuff is here now. It's like the news now. It's not fantasy, or it's not speculative anymore.
Right, and that's actually a great transition point, because Sheree, speaking of that great research work, could you take us through where you see Afrofuturism, where it's gone, and then sort of where do you see it going in the future?
Okay, that's a big question. Afrofuturism, the lane that I work in is in literature.
Mhm.
I don't work in architecture. I don't work in fashion. I'm not working in music. I don't work in social sciences or what have you. I'm a writer. I'm a creator. So I'm one of the creative people, as Reynaldo would say, the artsy, Reverend Rollins, the artsy community. That's where I am. So I'm looking at it as our art is part of memory making, as part of the storytelling. Reynaldo was initially talking about this being very similar to what W. Du Bois was writing in response to in the 1920s, right after the Spanish flu and during the Red Summer. I'm a few blocks literally in Memphis from where Red Summer hit us. But actually before the Red Summer, 1866, massive massacre took place downtown Memphis, around the corner from the National Civil Rights Museum. And that was in response, of course, our emancipation. There was a lot of unrest, financial angst amongst particularly the Irish community here in Memphis, the Pinch District, because they were going to be competing now financially with people whose labor initially was free. And now they're also, for the very first time, many of them, well, maybe with the exception of a few barbers, are being paid for labor. And so there's this whole workforce that's now is going to be competing with them. A lot of our Memphis police was a part of that massacre. There was a battle between the union and the local police on jurisdiction, and they just let us get murdered, men, women, and children, for over a week. So this whole idea of like people, just a whole mass, a mob of white people running up on your house, you know, demanding to be able to speak to you and everything. They weren't asking for papers then. They just murdered you. And for me, this is cyclical chaos. And it's the cyclical chaos that we've experienced ever since we've been brought against our will to these shores to work as the first tool of capitalism in America, actually, you know. So this idea of necro-capitalism, it's not a new concept. The whole idea of Black motherhood was an economic tool in this country. And because of that, we were dehumanized from the jump. Before birth, you're already dehumanized. So this ideal that we are somehow in a BC and an AC week, yeah, there are some things that will be changing. But a lot of this is a consistent pattern in the culture of our country, in the founding of it, all the hypocrisy of it. It's always been a part of it. And we aren't going to be the ones necessarily that's going to solve it, because it's not necessarily, we're not the ones who created it, if that makes any sense. We're going to constantly be navigating and responding to it. But until the pathology of what it means to be white and privileged in American culture is solved, which is not something Black people or any Black and brown group of people can do on their own, that's something that's an internal process. When you want to talk about psychology, we need to talk about, like Toni Morrison was talking about, the psychology of what it means to be white. Can you be white? Can you be Black if there's no white? Can you be white if there's no Black? These are concepts that were created based on deeply seated fears about their mortality, about their ability to continue and to maintain control over resources, natural resources, social and economic resources. What we're looking at now is cyclical chaos that's driven by deliberate public policy, and it always is. So what the coronavirus pandemic has revealed are the problems that have plagued our Black communities and our Latino communities and our indigenous communities from the beginning. These are not any new things. They're just now, just like the civil rights movement, where they placed on television the images of teenagers being mauled by dogs and fire hose, in southern towns. That changed perhaps people's perspective because it wasn't so insular to the South. It was nationally, broadcast. Now we're seeing leaders come out of their, legislative offices and say, you need to die for the economy. There isn't any quiet talk now. It isn't whispered. It isn't in the Turner diaries or in strange, obscure literature anymore. It's not a conspiracy, it's actually public policy voiced and recorded. So for me, what I'm looking at Afrofuturism now versus when we were talking about then, and I was wrong. At one point, I think I said that in the beginning, we were talking about the digital divide. And we're talking about a lot of abstract concepts in terms of Afrofuturism in the 1990s, right? I'm thinking of the Afrofuturism.net listserv. We're still dealing with the the digital divide. Like, part of the reason why I wasn't logged on initially was because, you know, you have to have a lot of bandwidth to do a lot of these programs. So we're on Zoom. You got to download the app. If it's on the phone, you can't just click on it. You got to have memory for all that. So this is a process. And I have friends who are educators and teachers, right? And they've been having to take their classrooms home and try to do what they do in the classroom, which is work miracles, especially in at-risk communities or in communities where students have other challenges, right? Learning disabilities and other challenges. You have to create a miracle in the classroom all the time, especially in the public system, right? And they're facing students who, you know, they're really, I mean, there might be a flat screen TV because that's cheap now, but there isn't necessarily a laptop for every student. Or if they do have a laptop, they don't necessarily have the good, you know, fast, you know, files or whatever. They don't have good bandwidth, so they can't do all the assignments in a practical, realistic manner on what they have at home. And that was something that was kind of surprising to a lot of people, because they thought, oh, it has been 2 decades, right? So we've moved forward and we have all these other physical markers of progress, right? But a smartphone and a flat screen TV is not necessarily a marker of economic stability. When you have, I'm in a city where they lie about it, because they've been lying about the poverty level of this country for decades, but over a third of the people here are poor. Over a third. And if we just look at children, the number is even higher, right? 90%, over 90% of the wealth is concentrated in very small hands in this city that's predominantly Black, 68% Black. So it's a lot of concentrated poverty that is part of deliberate policy, no matter who is in office, by the way. None of the actual things that move wealth and prosperity in this country, they don't actually change. Those committees don't change. You can't vote on the people who are sitting on those groups. You know what I mean? They are grandfathered in year after year. But all of this is just revealing problems that we've always had. So when we talk about institutions, okay, well, what new institutions are we going to create in Black communities to address white pathology, policies that are created deliberately to disenfranchise us and to disinvest resources from our communities? What other groups are we going to have to do that? How do you fireproof your the railroads that you lay down for yourself as a community? You know, so what I'm doing in terms of the literature and the art, I try to write about the people that I find that are often invisible in the storytelling. You know, these are not the people who are necessarily in the middle class or the upper middle class. These are the people who are the invisible statistics that are constantly being discussed. You know, the ones who are left behind, but they're still here. But all of a sudden, they're the essential frontline people, right? That's just another euphemism for disposable, right? So we're front facing during the pandemic, because guess what? We don't have generational wealth that's passed down. I mean, when we do have housing and things that's passed down, when we have an economic recession like we did in the early 2000s, right? We lose everything. You know, we haven't even recovered really from 2006, 2008. The measures that were given to address the deliberately predatory loans and things that caused so many foreclosures in our community and other communities across the country, they got to fine. Those banks got to fine. They weren't put out of business. They got to fine, and the money didn't go back to the families that lost their homes. They weren't given new money to go and buy straight out new homes that they lost in that process. They're starting from zero. They're renters now. And during this pandemic, whose rent has been canceled in the country? Whose mortgages have been canceled? Do they have a compensation program for that? So
Leave alone.
no, you understand what I'm just saying? So it's like, so at the end of the process, like I'm in a city right now that's getting ready to open back up. As soon as they heard that the majority of people dying from this were Black, the whole conversation, the tone, the urgency changed from we have to get testing and we have to, do contract tracing, and we have to do all the things that are intellectually intelligent, like you should be doing to address this. That went out the window, and suddenly it's about, oh, we need to open it up because we're safe, and the same people that are delivering your food, the same people that are packing your groceries, the same people that are, that are doing all the delivering your mail or what have you, it is what it is. So I don't see any of that changing now. It wasn't that different before. We just weren't that naked in our conversations about it. And we're constantly having to have these traumas that happen where we're saying, oh, this will be a wake-up call. And it isn't really. It's an opportunity. We're talking about curating the end of the world. It's an opportunity to curate a whole nother way of being. But you got to have a will. You have to have a willingness in the population, in the country, to have that. And what we're seeing is that a lot of our neighbors, a lot of our colleagues have very different points of view on what the future, what the present should be and what the future should look like. And it's often quite detrimental to what would make a utopian or even a halfway, livable Afro future. Because think about it, if the Afro future that all the different ones that we keep imagining are possible, we're talking about basic stuff like environmental responsibility. We're talking about having clean water, right? We're talking about lead-free playgrounds and schools. We're talking about decreasing asthma levels in poor communities and neighborhoods, which are distinctly connected to the environments in which their homes are built, right? I live in a city where we have whole communities built on landfills and things that the fence depot dumped poison literally just in the ground. Everyone knew it's outside of our community, and we're redlined right over to those houses, right? And then they sit around and ask, why do you have so many comorbidities? Why are you sick? Why do you have diabetes? Why do you have high blood pressure? Why do you have all these other things? Well, we're literally raising our babies in places that are designed to kill you, right? And they wouldn't put anybody else over there. They steer them away. So it's a public policy, but it's also private practice, private industries. And if we're not talking about this and we're not talking about white pathology, then there really isn't a practical conversation for Afrofuturism, because you're speaking about a world in which we don't have these major systemic, cultural, devastatingly horrific, destructive forces surrounding us. Now, if you're saying, hey, in a novel, which you can do very easily, guess what? All the white races are dead. And all their children too, right? And people that have different points of view decided to work together. Guess what? Asian community, the Indian communities, the South Asian communities, the Native American people, all these different black and brown, because we always say black and brown, right? But when I see problems, I don't see the black and brown standing up with each other. I see us. I see a whole bunch of black old women. Like, if we're gonna be real, I see a whole bunch of black church-going old black women and younger women are out there doing that work, right? That's what I see. I don't see all the other groups of the rainbow out there. I see them when we get over. I see them, as my Chicano sister said, walking across the bridge that is our back. Then they out there. And then they very quickly forget the trauma and the sacrifice that took place in order for them to be able to walk through the front door of the theater or to sit in that position or whatever, or they forget that the affirmative action laws that were rewritten to benefit white women. I mean, let's just be real, okay? Because now they're a minority. The biggest beneficiaries of white supremacist policies in the country, besides white men, are white women. But now they're minorities too. So I'm in a city where our Minority Diversity Council has black businesses have to compete with white women's businesses. In the city where 90-something% of the power and wealth is with white families anyway. So it's just, I don't have patience anymore for circular conversations, not that we're having one, but that don't really speak about the giant elephant in the room, which is projects are gonna take place very well, very successfully, if there is the type of unity across culture communities happening, because we are literally the majority of the world. We're literally the majority of the world, right? India, China, biggest populations on the planet, right? These communities are the biggest in the world. They know it. I'm speaking, when I say they, I mean our leadership in this country knows it, which is why we're having such a shrill conversation right now about these policies that we know that are fascist, that we know are white supremacist policies, that they are harking back to Woodrow Wilson's days. You know, it's very similar, and we know this, and we understand how policies like abortion rights and all these other things connect with this very real fear of mortality, that they're going to be erased in the population, that their power is going to be erased. So they're doing everything from voter disenfranchisement, closing down polls, shutting down DMVs, attacking people in their schools, flipping children over at pool sides, you know, shooting up men walking down the street, or jogging, or being nosy like a lot of us do and go look at the house that hasn't been built yet to see if it's better than the one you living in, or does it have the things that you might want if you were gonna build another house. Like, I walked in a construction site before to see what's going on. You know, before I worked with Habitat for Humanity, I didn't know how houses were built. I walked in to see what's going on and walked back out. Does that mean I need to get shot up by a posse, you know, going down the street? And can I do a citizen's arrest? What Black people have survived doing citizens arrest of white people? I mean, I'm just saying, it's a lot going on. There's a lot of desperation because they feel like they're in a moment where there's an apartheid moment. And there's a window of opportunity that's gonna pass them by. And if they don't lock down all the power right now, you know, stuff in the federal judges, the Congress, like all the branches of our government, if they don't consolidate that power, then there may be a possibility of us building the hope and change that other people were trying to create and talk about so many years ago. And they don't want that because they are very comfortable in the privileged power that they have. So they will create an apartheid system in this country if that's the last thing they do. And they will break all norms, all precedents, all protocol to do it. And we're watching them do it. And the news is just quietly reporting on it as if this is common and everyone's so calm about it. And we could just watch groups of armed people rush up on capitals in a way that young Black people could not march quietly in Ferguson, right? Peacefully in Ferguson. They are met with riot gear. They are spat upon. They are yelled at. They are shoved. They are tear gassed. It's a whole different way that the news reports it. A completely different conversation is happening here. And these people are risking other people's lives by gathering at these capitals. We are in a pandemic, but now we're getting ready to pretend like the emperor has clothes on when he's buck naked in front of us, crazy as a loon. And we're all just gonna sit here and act like this is normal. So, I mean, for me, we have to deal with somebody has to deal with the white pathology. Then we can talk about Afrofuturism and Afro-pessimism, because Afro-pessimism for me, beyond the academic conversations about it, is really just a reality, an understanding that Afrofuture is not gonna happen if we still gotta deal with this cyclical chaos that we've been dealing with since before 1619. But you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I wanted to circle back around to that idea of Afro-pessimism. And I haven't heard from Brother Andrews. I was kind of directing this at you, because I'm a James Cone Black liberation theologist. That's kind of my training and my upbringing as a Christian. But I'm kind of curious your perspective on what is the role of faith in Afrofuturism?
Well, Afrofuturism and faith really intertwined. I was looking at some notes from a presentation that I was privileged to give down in Jackson State about 4 years ago. And the name of this presentation was Black Slavery Religion, the Roots of Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism just didn't drop down out of space. It's based upon a worldview, a cosmology that's not Western, but that is African. And so when Black slaves were brought here, the first thing we got to realize is that really, for most of the time in slavery, most Blacks were not part of an organized church. And for the first 150 years of slavery, there was no attempt to even convert Blacks to Western Christianity. So they were practicing their African religions. Now, when finally we began to get involved with the Christian concept that was brought to us by the white master, we still took that and incorporated our African worldview. Now, when you talk about faith and you talk about James Cone, I mean, I believe in and see the value of Black liberation theology. But there was an aspect of this that Cone did not deal with. Mm-hmm. Cone dealt with our political and our sociological positions, but he did not deal with the African culture that much. And so I've been really getting into this man named 19th century leader, Edward Blyden. And it's a new book out on Edward Blyden called Edward W. Blyden's The Intellectual Transformation, called Afro-Publicanism, Pan-Africanism, Islam, and the Indigenous West African Church. He was a leader in the 19th century that was born in the West Indies, came to the United States before the Civil War, couldn't get into Rutgers, couldn't get any school here. So he moved to Monrovia, Liberia, where he got his education. And he became he's considered the father of modern day Pan-Africanism. And so that both of Du Bois and Casey Helwood was influenced by him. And then later on, both Nkrumah and Padmore were influenced by him. But he was also an ordained minister. But what he did, he began to see that when he got to Africa, he saw the value in African culture. Now, we're never going to get our liberation as long as we're worshiping the white Jesus. And as long as we got the white Jesus in our hearts, we're not going to make it. Now, Reynaldo, I was privileged to be his pastor. We was a graduate student. And he would tell you that I'm the preacher to get the white Jesus down. Every church that the bishop has assigned me to that had a white Jesus up, before I finish my time in them, white Jesus is down. But I can get the white Jesus off the wall easier than I can get the white Jesus out of a lot of folks' hearts. Now, until we get the white Jesus out of our hearts and have a more Afrocentric oriented spirituality, we're never going to do for ourselves. You know, we're going to talk about all we don't have. But see, I'm more of an Afro-positivist than an Afro-pessimist. And I believe in what we can do, you know, because if I can't do nothing else, I can spit in the master's food. I can do something, all right? If he goes to sleep around me, I can cut his throat. So he is not God. The white man is not God. He can fall. And we live in a time when this empire is falling. The white man's empire is falling. Now, here's what we've got to ask ourselves as Afrofuturists. Are we so in love with the empire of the white man that while he's falling, we just gonna hold on to him and go down with him? Do we love this white master that much that we see him falling, but we're gonna go down with him? Now, he's being challenged mightily by China. But here's the question Black people all over the world got to ask themselves. And it goes back to what Garvey said. He said, where's the Black man's flag? Where's the Black man's country? Until we have a Black superpower in this world, Black people nowhere in the world are going to be respected. The Jews had a lot of money, but they realized until they had a country with an army, with an air force, with some nuclear power, they were never going to get any respect. Now, until there's a Black country that can put some battleships on the sea, that got some aircraft carriers, that got some Marines on board them ships that can make a landing somewhere and rescue our people when they're in trouble, like Jews go and rescue Jews when they're in trouble, we're never going to get any respect. And we do have the resources to do it. Right now in America, Black folks in America have been making a lot of money. But because of our twisted value system, we waste that money. We don't know how to pool it. We don't know how to properly invest it. We don't know how to use it for our own development. So I think we need a geopolitics that's African-centered and is around building a power for Black people so we can protect ourselves. But until we get a spirituality, see, we're the only race of people that got a spirituality that comes from the white folks. The Japanese, they got their own thing. They got Shintoism. And our Christianity that we've got here is too Eurocentric. Even when we call ourselves Protestants, we're basing that on Martin Luther or John Wesley. But I'm looking at the core to think we're not really even Protestants. We call ourselves that. So I reached into the African-centeredness of the religion that many slaves like Denmark Vesey practice as a projection for the type of Afrofuturism that we should have. Now, the last thing I want to say here, because I like to give other people a chance here, because I can go on. I like to preach. I preach for 2-3 hours here. But until we recognize that we must be warriors, that we are at war, quit talking that fat boy talk like you're not at war. See, here's what I don't like. The white man can have a chaplain that bless his soldiers before they go fight. But the American Black preacher supposed to tell our people, don't you fight back. What kind of religion is that? That's a religion given us by the master. So until we recognize that we are warriors, we're not going to make it. So I consider myself, I'm a disciple following in the tradition of the Black warrior priest, Denmark Vesey. So if people ask me, what is my philosophy of ministry? Well, it's based on the warrior priest, Denmark Vesey. Okay, and until we get that in our hearts, we're not going to make it. We got the means to do it. We got enough money to do it. We got enough educated people to do it. We got doctors, we got lawyers, we got engineers, we got nuclear physicists, we got astronomers, we got all that in our race right here. But because of our mindset, we cannot even pool our economic resources, we cannot pool our intellectual capital, and that goes back to our religion, because we got what we got is some bad religion. And bad religion is poison. You know, I told one friend of mine, I said, we got to step on religion. We're not even practicing Christianity. Because if we go back and find the original Christianity of Jesus, we find that it's altogether different from what the master gave us. See, what happened was the Romans grabbed it, but Constantine, he stepped on it. Like bad dope, you step on it too many times, it don't have no power. And then the Roman Catholic Church came along, and Vatican, they stepped on it. And then the white Protestant Reformation came along with Martin Luther and John Wesley, they stepped on it. And then the white master over here, he stepped on it. And then that's what they gave us, some stepped on religion. And then we thought it was Christianity. But if we go back and see what the original Christianity was, what we'll see that Jesus was a freedom fighter, and that he was leading an Afro-Asian people against the rise up against domination by the Romans. See, until we get those kind of concepts in our head, we're not going to ever make it. So somehow, some of what we call it faith is some messed up stuff that white folks gave us. So we need a spirituality that empowers us. We need a metaphysics, a worldview that empowers us. And once we get a spirituality that speaks to who we are, and a metaphysics that gives us a worldview based on who we are, then we can get into some real geopolitics. But right now, we so messed up that if we fight against the white master, we want to know, was that a sin? I killed the white master. Was that a sin? But you can go overseas and you can kill Chinese, you can kill Vietnamese, you can kill Japanese, you can kill Germans all day long. And they tell you, oh, that's of the Lord. That kind of killing is of the Lord. But you get here and defend yourself, that's a sin. And that's because we got bad religion. So I'm making so Afrofuturism must make sure that we have good religion that's positive and that's about our liberation. Well, I'm gonna stop there. I got some more stuff, but I'm gonna stop right now.
Well, the questions are coming in fast and furious, so I'm gonna jump into some of the questions that have been posted. This one's aimed to Reynaldo, but I'm curious to hear other folks' opinions on it. But I'd like to know your opinion about renewed interest in returning to the motherland en masse as expats, where there's a wealth of opportunities for us in Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, and South Africa, or in investing there more intentionally to support our brothers and sisters there while offsetting our losses here. So
okay. I'm like this. For the last decade, I've done a couple of projects in Africa, in particular in Ghana. I've been to several other countries over there. I think two things. One, a lot of our people need to learn Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Probably the wealthiest continent in natural resources in the world. And we should take an interest in it from our childhood until as adults, because every other ethnic group is interested in the continent. And to be real practical about it, we have to face up to the fact that Africa has a lot of corruption.
That's right.
We would not have been over there if there had not been a lot of corrupt African leaders that had participated in the slave trade. Now, the average everyday African, whatever, they weren't responsible for this. But some of those people that are of royal families and stuff over in Africa, they were part of that. Now, half of them deserve to be executed. Now, one of the things, until there's a Pan-Africanism from the ground up, I don't think what Africa is supposed to be will not be realized. Because when you go to Africa, shoot, one of the countries over there, Ghana, let me see, the telecommunications is controlled by or dominated by either Great Britain or the United States. The oil sector is dominated by the English, and that's all a part of these austerity things and stuff since the globalization period of the 90s, where they say you a good African country if you let these Western multinationals come in and dominate and let them dominate the economic sector. Of the Western powers that were the worst, I would say France is the worst, because I know in a lot of French-speaking Africa, when towards the end of colonization, the French basically demanded that those countries, in return for some semblance of political independence, the French were allowed to keep an economic grip on the country, and if they didn't go along with that, the French would rip up all of the infrastructure in the country. So that's why my thing, and that's why France has French-speaking Africa still in its grip through its currency system. The English is a little bit less likely, but all of the Western powers have had, it's not as strong as it used to be, because the way they dominate Africa now, they encourage the elite families and people with money to go to Africa for college, Oxford and so forth. You know, I remember when I was going to Cameroon and you see all these brothers with money coming back with their white wives from Paris on the way to Douala, Cameroon. And a lot of those dictators keep their money in Swiss banks that they pillage out of the country. And then they can't communicate with each other yet. We still see each other through the lenses of Western communication system. You know, I even had colleagues. Now, to me, as far until the end, I had no problems with Robert Mugabe. Him taking the land back in Zimbabwe was a good thing, and a lot of the Africans like that. But you'd have Western intellectuals who call themselves progressive here crying like babies because Mugabe, there were a few thousand people killed, and he stayed on too long, in my opinion, too long. But yeah, African, the Civil War in the Congos led to millions of people dying, and they won't shed a tear over it. So one of the things is, in terms of, first, we got to have the ability to talk directly to each other, unencumbered, without white folks or to that fact, Asian people either.
Yeah, don't leave out the Asians.
Now.
Yeah.
No, the Chinese are not a real friend of Africa either. Mm-hmm. They have them signing contracts over in Africa that's written in Mandarin, and them people signing stuff over. Okay. Now, I know some of the countries now, the pandemic now, you're going to see that they're trying to push the Chinese out, which they should. Because the Chinese, they got to look at the system that's trying to dominate Africa. Is not, they shouldn't even call it China or American. They should call it Chimerica. Because Chinese and America's economies are interlocked right now. Mm-hmm. And they both want to have access to the same resources on the African continent. Now, in a speculative way, I think Tendai Huchu's short story, The Sale, which came out several years ago, if you Google his short story called The Sale by Tendai Huchu, he describes this process of what happens when you got Chinese and America dominating African societies in the future. Now, Africans are the only race of people in the world where 1/3 of their population is outside of their boundaries, okay? And they got to realize the same way, like over here, we have no friends. The Arabs are not their friends either. You know, the Arabs took more slaves out of Africa than even the Europeans did, except a lot of times that now that African scholars are publishing the work, they would take African male slaves and then take them over into the Middle East, and you don't see them representing the population as much because they castrated a lot of the African male slaves to be eunuchs and do other things. So we owe the Arabs nothing, okay? So my thing is, because the Arabs got too many of them, they got too much of that Arabized form of religion in their hearts. And over there doing that crazy ass jihadism over there, bumping their head on the ground towards some Muslims over in Saudi Arabia who are then financing some of the jihadism that's disrupting African society. Nigeria is a tinderbox at the moment, along religious fault lines, in terms of now, and we have to study the situation more, because Islam is a good religion, but you don't have to speak Arabic or sound like you're an Arab or be a Blairab, as some of them talk it, to be a good Muslim. Okay? Now, but the thing is, the same way that white folks gave blacks a blue-eyed, blonde, surfer-looking Jesus, the Arabs give to black Africans an Arabic-looking person who looks like a white person, even though you're not supposed to portray him. But we know that Muhammad was a dark-skinned brother because where his mama was from. Okay, and where he hid out when he was on the run from his enemies in Saudi Arabia, he hid out in East Africa. Okay, the same way Jesus hid out in Egypt. So historically speaking, Africa has been an enlightened place that took in everybody and hid them from their enemies. But that's back when we were powerful. Now, as Reverend Rollins said, I'm Afro-positive about it, because in terms of human history, 7,000 years of history, we've just had a bad 400 or 500 years. And that system that created that 400 or 500 years of problems is coming to an end. And we got to decide where we're going to go going forward, because we can do it. But I think but it deals with those religious issues. And I think it starts at the home, because in my own family, my kids will laugh when I tell you, I said, no, God is black, Jesus is black, and whoever the white person is at president is the devil. And that's how you got to look at it, or whatever. And I would never, even though my kids went to a private school, I preached him. I told him the Pope was not your religious head of your religious faith, and I automatically distinguished that in my household, you know. And I'm not worried about, yeah, that's his name, Tendai Huchu, Sheree, who wrote The Sale. And that's why I think after this thing, and that's why I'm glad a lot of the young people have abandoned some of the way the Black church is conducting business now, until they come up with a real African-centered religious approach. The Black church deserves to be abandoned in the United States. And that goes for a lot of our institutions. Until, I mean, you have historically Black colleges that don't even offer a Black studies program, because, and I understand why that is, because a lot of the presidents that they appoint to manage these schools are nothing but closet Black Republicans who get appointed by the administration in these other states. Now, a lot of the professors in the student body are Black conscious, but you still got too many Aunt Jemimas and Uncle Toms that are leading the institutions. Okay, so we're gonna have to reform those things. Because coming out of this, and then Sheree and I talked about in Portland last year, we brought up this thing, even in the Afrofuturist movement. Like, I would consider you and the Kepler Institute, you all are the movement Afrofuturists. But see what you've had a rise of in the last couple of years, you got the academician types who, you go back and look at their resume from 2 years ago, them Negroes was something else on paper. But because they found this shiny new bauble now, they trying to rebrand themselves so they can get tenure or whatever. Because I remember as one thing, as somebody told me once, as a professor, I've been teaching in higher ed from graduate school up to now 26 years now. So I think I can say this. White institutions don't like keeping Black scholars that cannot keep them up on what the latest ideas going on in the Black community. And the Black speculative arts movement and a lot of this current wave of Afrofuturism did not come out of the white institutions. It came out of community organizations. If you look at some of the most influential people that came out of doing it now, they came out of HBCU, Natasha Womack, Clark Atlanta, other places like Morehouse, Jackson State, Prairie View. And in terms of our John Jennings, he's a Jackson State grad. So you're going to see a certain kind of tension there inside the Afrofuturist movement, because you're going to have some people that want to promote Afrofuturism as a diversity project, okay? And then you're going to have those Afrofuturists who are promoting it as a freedom project, okay? Which is why it's so important that the work that Sheree has going forward and the work that Reverend Rollins does at the community level goes forward. And I think so. This was going forward, we're going to have an internal debate and an external debate going on at the same time.
Well, actually, because we're quickly winding down on time, I think what I'd like to explore lastly is exactly that point. At the community level, what lessons of Afrofuturism do we apply to our community work? How do we begin to build that better world? And what could that world look like?
Well, our people tend to be practical and pragmatic. That means you got to show and prove. What are you doing that reflects what you're talking about? Okay. Since last spring, when I was at the Institute for the Future, I gave a lecture in Silicon Valley at Palo Alto last year, and I had a professional corporate futurist tell me after the presentation, he thought it was the best culturally focused futures project he'd seen presented. And that's when he told me, he said, no, at the highest levels of the American society and government, he said the billionaires have had conversations with the corporate futurists. They knew that there was going to be some type of trouble coming economically because the way the world system is financed, they knew it wasn't going to survive much longer. So they're figuring out how to survive this collapse. And that's why what you could look at, like a lot of you all know, food prices went up. Inflation, the highest it's been in 40 years. So I would say right now at the community level, you got to come up with what, like the Black Panther Party, what are the survival programs of now? Okay. So the thing is, if you know that inflation is going up, they passing all this stimulus, printing this money, then the historical period you got to look at is Weimar Germany. When they printed all that money, that's why a loaf of bread 18 months now might cost you $20. Okay. So that means you have to do things that protect value. One thing that survive value across thing Jewish people always kept diamonds and gold on their person because that could be exchanged. And so, so since last year, I've been purchasing small amounts of gold. The other thing is, I was telling, I got somebody, see the young cats, the young people are really on it. A lot of them now, they use their Cash App, like they're using their stimulus check, they're going to get Bitcoin, okay? Because if something happens with the banking system here over the next several months and you go to the ATM and can't get your money out, you can still get your Bitcoin because it's on your Cash App. And you got $1,000 or $2,000 in Bitcoin on your Cash App, so you can make some moves until they figure out how they're going to reorganize the system, but you still got to eat. Some people are planting urban gardens because we know our food has been poisoned or whatever. So that's why I really been getting into these vitamin supplements. I mean, these meat packing plants, that's almost making me want to become a strict vegan. Then people are all sick and they're cutting on the meat and stuff. And I'm like, ooh, so we got to look at our dietary practices. I remember I guess me and Sheree, I'm one of the last generation that remember grandmama and them having those country gardens, and when she used to jar up all that stuff in the cabinet and then get it out the cabinet when it's time for us to have a meal. So we can be positive about things. We already know what to do. We already know that the food supply chain is going to be interrupted this summer. So to me, if you got a friend and you got some little piece of acre or something, go out and plant some vegetables and harvest that stuff at the end of the summer. They already said we're getting ready to go through a dark winter. Now, who wants to go when this second wave comes this fall and you dealing with influenza and COVID-19? There's no vaccine still, and you still got to go shopping to get something to eat and it's cold. And we don't know what kind of social order. So to me, it's the time to plant a space anywhere. Even if you got a friend in a community garden, and these are, I'm just saying, temporary survival programs to get through the next 18 months while you work on your ideas, okay? And those are just real practical things. And have a passport. I believe I had one of my brothers told me, as of June 1st, you ain't going to be able to apply for a passport anymore through the post office. So you need to have your passport so you can get around. And so that's what I'm saying. Get your some of your supplies up. Don't use your stimulus check to go and get some new Jordans and some other junk you can't take with you. It should be you should use your stimulus check and invest it in a survival program. And then lastly, us staying sheltered and shut in, I'm equivalent making, to me, the analogy I like what we're doing a new version of the Montgomery bus boycott, okay? Because we don't own hardly any of these businesses that they want us to go spend the money at. And those people take our money and still vote and support the Republicans anyway. So let them crash, okay? They got us, if we suffering, we need to spread the suffering around. I say take your stimulus and put it into your own home survival program. Don't go put it in Mr. Charlie's pocket, as they used to talk about, so he can go and vote and write a check for the local Republican candidate or some other jerk that's going to come and lock you up or judge or whatever. Spend the money on your survival program, these stimulus checks that you got left, and then get ready to hunker down for the winter, stay in touch with friends and family, and then and you got all this time down. I mean, they got audio books now, all this other kind of stuff, and feed your brain and build your network during this time of catastrophe, and then come out with a game plan. As soon as it's over with, you off to the races with a game plan. So that's why I would say the community a survival program for the pandemic that for the next 18 months.
All right, let me step in for a minute. I got a chance to see the Kemper Institute, which is really wonderful. It was very inspiring to see what you're already doing in terms of the community work. That I feel like you all are already on top of a lot of that in Indianapolis there, because once you find a way to help people feed themselves, shelter themselves, you're taking care of their physical health, and then they are open to you exploring and elevating their minds, right? But if you're dealing with the practical initially, and you help, and they see that they can trust you to help them solve real day, everyday problems that they're facing, and you are realistic about that, you building faith and relationships that can help you go to another level in terms of growing as a community. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And like that was said in the other conversation, some of our own institutions are no longer doing that for us like they used to. People don't have as much faith in them. And it's just a lot of change right now in terms of people choosing family, choosing home, choosing other places than where they, where they are naturally, coming up with. For me, I would like to say that not everybody's going to have the luxury to sit at home and listen to some audiobooks, right? Okay, because they're not getting a check coming in from the university, and they don't have a pension that's coming in, and they ain't on Social Security because they're going to have to work till they're 80. My generation, we're going to probably have to work till we're 80, if it still exists at all. All right, so let's just be real on that. So other people, they're going to be still out here in these streets working with the people who aren't wearing masks and who are very proud their freedom to potentially create harm for other people, right? So what do we have for those folks who are on the front lines, who can't afford to literally be at home right now? Not that people couldn't afford to do that during the Montgomery bus boycotts either, but they were still going to work. They weren't staying home from work. They just wasn't taking their bus to work. They were carpooling and walking and such. All right, so what does that look like for us? Right now, the institutions, like I used to be a member of the NAACP, used to be a member of quite a few organizations that I need to reevaluate on whether or not I want to continue, right? Because you look at the national and you don't feel like there's a lot of impact. The most visible thing are the awards, which they give them to whoever, and you ain't even got to be Black to get an NAACP award, right? These days. But on a local level, they have a lot of potential to do a lot of good, right? As many of our organizations, you know what I'm saying? You have to look at what's happening on a local level and who is there and who can you communicate with, and are they people that you can talk with? And is there something that you can do to reproduce pantries for people when they don't have, like in the middle of the pandemic, people are running out of food, right? So most of the time we would go to our soup kitchens at our churches and things. You know what I'm saying? Is there a way for you to add on to that support system? A lot of people in our communities have green thumbs. They're great gardeners. My mom's a great gardener for herself. Is there a way that we can create a program where you're not just, you don't even have to have someone say you don't have to have land. I'm growing things right out of my window right now. I don't have land to put the garden on, not where I live right now. Is there a way that you can put in on a community garden situation like the Keffer Institute? You all have that process where maybe you don't have a green thumb, but you got some extra coins. You can put some money in to buy some seeds. You can go in and on the weekends, maybe go in and help move some dirt and do the things that need to be done to keep things growing. Maybe you're growing your own food, but you can, grow a plot for someone else. When I lived in Brooklyn, there was a community garden on my block, and everybody had food, and they had too much often, and they would just give it to each other because they had so much coming in. So there's a possibility for that. A lot of our community health clinics, again, they're not operated and run by us necessarily, right? There are things that we can be creating on our own, because at the end of the day, I was telling another friend, I was like, you know what? I remember growing up, there used to be such disdain for certain elders who refused to go to the doctor or wouldn't go to the hospital when they got ill. And people would think, oh, they're just stubborn, or they aren't, they aren't wise, or they're superstitious. But then sitting here watching this pandemic and listening to these nurses speak privately on their YouTube channels and what have you, and talk about the neglect that they're seeing in some of the hospitals, particularly in New York, where I still have family. You realize, you know what, you're on the bottom of the totem pole to get the ventilator. They're not checking to see if the tube is in your mouth or in your throat. They're not throwing a blanket over your body. In fact, they're telling you to go back home and fight it out for yourself. A nurse in Detroit who worked at the hospital for 31 years, was about to retire, has to go back twice to try to get care at the hospital where she works, and she's still being sent home to die. And she died from coronavirus because they refused to admit her or treat her, right? So we're like, if you're in the bottom of the totem pole in every other situation, why would it be different during a pandemic? So now I'm wondering, like, you know, I'm one of those people. I'm almost certain that I had it last year and didn't know it. And that's something I'm waiting on the antibodies test that they're going to get around to, you know, having it available here, because I want to know, because it really disturbs me, it really stresses me. It's the worst. I have never been that ill, and I have given birth to 2 children live, right? It's the worst experience I've had in my entire life. 6 weeks, I thought I was going to leave this planet. I thought it was over. And only by the grace. I mean, I'm saying waking up in the middle of the night, not able to breathe, feeling like your water just filling up in your body. And my throat felt like bark had just suddenly materialized in my esophagus. Just horrible stuff. And a person who's not very ill often. It was terrible last summer. And I'm thinking, wow, people are very ill. We're trying to get to the hospitals, and we're the last people they want to deal with. You understand what I'm saying? We see the stories of the people who died. The man, the poor bus driver, I think his name was Jason Hargrove. He was speaking about the customer on the bus that spat, you know, that was coughing on him, and you know, within 2 weeks he had passed away, right? After his video went viral, we find out from his wife that it was a struggle for him to get treatment, which is part of the reason why he's died. So I'm just saying, maybe there is, we need to figure out other ways to help each other health-wise, with the food as well, pooling our resources together for childcare, because, you know, they're opening up, I'm in a red state, so they're opening up, you know, as fast as they can. I don't know who's going to be sitting there with them. They open up.
Yeah, because
Renee Thomas.
Yeah, black folks that are the daycare workers in the country.
Good luck to them and those businesses, but hello, you better stick to the curb. If we even go into the curb, because I can cook, you know. But there is a need for us to basically create our own alternative resources to support ourselves, because this is people, you're talking about the sales story. I'm looking at Derek Bell's short story, Space Traders. He wrote to Space Traders in his collection. Spaces at the bottom of the well. He's a civil rights attorney, very beloved. It's in Dark Matter, first volume that I edited. And they also did it, was part of the Cosmic Slop trilogy short film that George Clinton hosted that was on TV in the 80s, Cosmic Slop. And the short story was the Space Traders starring Robert Guillaume. Robert Guillaume was in it. And it basically, aliens come to the United States of America and offer world peace. They solve all, you know, environmental problems, heal cancer, all kinds of things. In exchange, no questions asked, for all of the citizens in the country of a certain melanin level. And this creates a national debate on, should we give these mostly Black people of a certain shade and up to the aliens, or should we fight for these citizens? And so he footnoted that story with a lot of legal precedent, including the Japanese internments and other things, to talk about moments in American history where people's citizenship was just tossed out the window. You understand what I'm saying? There was no concern about freedom and the constitutional rights of these citizens. Their property was taken from them, their homes. They went through a lot of trauma. And they received reparations. Of course, we have not, but they received reparations for that eventually. But I'm looking at, you know, Derek Bell's short story, and I'm looking at the news daily, and I'm like, you know, if that were a question, I mean, we already know the answer to that. In 2020, most of the country is now talking about opening up the economy when they have not a vaccine the first. Right? And they're barely testing it, you know, and this is voluntary testing, by the way. So they're barely testing anyone. And you have to keep testing them anyway for it to be relevant. Like, it's not like a one test for life. You know, you can go get tested, stand in the line and go get tested, get swabbed, and then go to Walgreens or Kroger the next day and get the coronavirus and be walking around with it. You haven't been tested again, but you're walking around like you're free. this is the work of people who've already decided that death is a part of the program, which it has always been a part of the capitalist program in this country. We forget that Labor Day, is a thing, and there's a reason why we have certain policies now. People had to die in workforce, in work situations in order to make to sacrifice in order to make things better, because there was an ideal that children could be worked to death in mines, that you didn't have to have fire safety in buildings, and that you could work nonstop hours. So I'm just saying, we have a history.
Sheree, and I just want to say, because I know one of the subjects of my dissertation is a brother who's been in prison now for almost 50 years. Ed Poindexter's been in since the 70s.
Been there since 1970.
Yeah, he was in my dissertation, still in prison as a political prisoner, member of the Black Panther Party. We're not even talking about after this, those of us who survive, we're gonna have rehabilitation issues. They're already talking about, if you're one of them people on a ventilator, your kidneys are messed up. And I've had Black nurses tell me that they might be overusing the ventilator. She's saying, has a doctorate in nursing, she's talking about they put the tubes down your nose and accelerate there might be a better option than going to the ventilator. And I mean, and when you think of all of our people that are a part of this prison criminal justice system now, that those that survive, even if you're one of the survivors, some of them are going to have rehabilitation issues with no health insurance. And I think the other thing, Kepler ought to see if we can import some of this tea that the Africans are using with this Artemisia that comes out of Madagascar. They're like, we already know we ain't got a health system, but it appears to be a therapeutic that'll relieve some symptoms. And let's give Reverend Rollins, I guess the pastor can close us out here.
Yep, that's where I was heading to.
Well, I really enjoyed the discussion on diet, and I want to talk about diet and spirituality and diet and mental health. I really believe that your good mental health is hinged upon, in many ways, a good diet, and even your ability to worship and to connect with the Almighty is impacted by the type of diet that you're on. And when I've studied different paths in the African and the Asian world of spirituality, one of the things they mandate for anybody who becomes an initiate is to get on a certain diet. That unless you're on this proper diet, you're not going to be able to walk the spiritual path. And so often, even before this coronavirus pandemic, so many of our people were on such a terrible diet that they couldn't even think straight. And I know when I watch my diet, I'm better off. Right now I'm taking a whole lot of supplements, and it costs me a lot of money. But then I thought when I was younger, before I knew the Lord, I used to waste more money getting stuff that wasn't no good for me, or having a party, and so I said, certainly I could spend that much money, really less than what I would spend partying on supplements that's for my health. And so we really need to teach, and a lot of times by word and by example, because people, we never know who's looking at us, and what we eat and what we care about eating, and what we know is good for us. I consider myself a warrior priest, but I can't. I used to joke with some preachers a long time ago. I said, now Jesus wasn't a fat daddy, and neither was John the Baptist. They were on a different type of diet. And if you're talking about you, a man or woman of God, and you're on a terrible diet where you're overweight, where it's affecting your health, you're not walking according to the way God would want you to walk, and you really can't hear from heaven.
Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to be, so I'm going to ask this last question as sort of our wrap-up question. So if all the people listening to this conversation and hearing your wise words, if they wanted to check out a book of yours to further explore your work, what book would you recommend that they go check out?
Okay, the latest book that we have come out is called The Black Speculative Arts Movement, Black Futurity Art Plus Design. That came out 6 months ago. It was the second part to the 2.0 anthology series. That book you can get from Lexington. And a book that I would recommend somebody to read to maybe understand what's going to happen with the economic system, I would definitely recommend Mackenzie Wark's book, Is This Capitalism or Something Worse? You know, and then I would say, I don't think the book, I think you can't even buy it anymore now. There was a book dealing with, you could look at this, it's a thin book called The Black Plague and the Transformation of the West. Now, the West, that's how they came up with the ideas to dominate the world after the Black Plague several hundred years ago. And so that is where a lot of their ideas, they came out after a plague and then proceeded to conquer the rest of the world for a short period of time. But I also recommend reading Du Bois's Dark Water. You know, I recommend that. And but there's some good stuff. I know, and I highly recommend reading Sheree Renee Thomas's new book, 9 Bar Blues, Tales from the Afro Future. And I'll let her speak more on, she can elaborate more.
All right. Sheree?
I would say to get Obsidian, I was asking for a copy of Obsidian 2.0. I mean, not 2.0, the new one. It's on the shelf. It's on the shelf. I don't think it's on my shelf. And then also, because we did a whole special volume of Afrofuturism. I don't know if you can see this, Obsidian.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the Afrofuturism 2.0 manifesto in it that Dr. Reynaldo Anderson wrote, as well as one other essays on Afrofuturism, and of course, original short fiction and poetry and visual art portfolios throughout, and screenplays, and short film screenplays and interviews. So it's actually won the Parnassus Award for Best Edited Literary volume to come out of the MLA when it was published. And of course, my new collection. You want to know what my imagination is? 9 Bar Blues, Stories from an Ancient Future from Third Man Books, which is out right now. You can get it as an ebook or as a trade paperback. And I'm also right now, I'm reading, because I remember when Nora Jemison read this, we did a reading together with the New York Review of Science Fiction readings in New York some years ago, and she read what we thought was a short story, The City We Became, but now it is a novel.
Yep.
So I have a copy of this from her, which I think is going to be the rest of my pandemic reading.
All right, and Andrew.
Okay, well, I would recommend looking at a anthology that Reynaldo Anderson edited, Cosmic Underground, A Grimoire of Black Speculative Discontent. I have 2 essays in there. One is The Oddities of Nature, which I deal with the theology and the ministry of Bishop Mason, who is the founder of the Church of God in Christ. And then another one essay I have in there, The Harmonics and Metaphysics, the harmonics and modalities of metaphysical blackness. And there I talk about an interpretation of modern jazz as an expression of Afro-Orientalism. And then again, I want to encourage you, because I'm busy studying this book backwards and forward. This is a new book out on Edward Blyden. You can see it right here. And it's by Harry N.K. Odominton. But I've always been fascinated with Edward Blyden as a Black man born in the Western Hemisphere. But then by 18, he moved to Africa and became a real forerunner in this movement of Pan-Africanism, which I think we could get a foundation for what we need to do in the future from his writings.
Well, again, I would like to just thank my panelists for your wisdom, for your time, and your willingness to give to us. I appreciate this conversation. I look forward to future conversations with all of you. And I'd like to thank all of you for all the guests who have been watching this time, viewing this time. We hope to hear back from you, and we look forward to talking with you all later. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, so Maurice,
Yes, sir.
how many people end up logging in?